Hi, and welcome to this presentation. My name is Kathy Patty, and this is a presentation on preparing and presenting an interactive fiction read aloud. And this presentation is going to give you some evidence-based strategies to create effective and engaging read alouds that promote text comprehension and target critical literacy skills. I have been a language arts teacher for 8 years, and I'm currently a student at Sam Houston State University, where I'm working on my master's degree in library science. So that's a little bit of my background for this presentation. So interactive read alouds have a great deal of benefits for our students. First, they have the opportunity to hear fluent reading, including reading rate, expression, and phrasing. And this model will help our students become more fluent readers on their own. Teachers can model thinking during reading by thinking out loud, and this supports students through the process as they interact with text. Teaching our students good strategies comes from modeling thinking for students. Students are exposed to new vocabulary and context and are able to build meaning for these words. Teachers can expose students to a variety of text structures, genres, and varied types of writing. And this will take a lot of preparation on the teacher's part to make sure they're selecting texts of a wide variety for our students. Students have the opportunity to engage in collaborative learning with peers to build comprehension of text. This is one of the most important features of interactive read alouds. Students need the opportunity to share their thoughts with their peers about what's happening in the story. Teachers can target students with a wide range of reading abilities in one activity by developing effective questions and follow-up activities. So it's very important that the teacher is purposeful in their planning for a read aloud and is carefully selecting activities that are going to target skills in their planning. Students gain an important background knowledge and strategies for approaching a text. This is a great benefit of read alouds, able to transfer the skills they learn during read alouds into their independent reading and become more confident as readers. And finally, students may express an increased motivation to read independently as a result of interactive read alouds, and the more frequently these are done, the more excited students get about reading. So planning ahead is a critical step in the read aloud process. With careful planning, reading aloud is a powerful way to help students connect with and comprehend a text. When a teacher fails to plan or does minimal planning, the read aloud will not be effective and students may display unwanted behaviors. If you don't plan well, students may not be engaged, they may not be learning, they may be talking, they may be looking around the room. So we want to make sure we're planning this lesson carefully so that students are really interested and engaged in this lesson. So considerations before any read aloud include you need to determine the learning objective and the skill to be targeted, and this is really where you should start. You want to choose the part of your curriculum that you're focusing on. That way you can select a text that's going to lend itself well to that skill. Then you're going to carefully select a text with help of resources such as the school librarian. There's lots of guides and even online resources that can help you find certain texts to target different skills. So make sure you're very careful on your text selection. Pre-read the text and reread it to help you plan. This is very important. When you pre-read the text, you have a chance to anticipate background knowledge that you may need to build with your students or vocabulary words you may need to pre-teach, especially for those ELLs. And you can also, when you pre-read, determine places in the text to stop for questioning, thinking aloud, making predictions, or making connections. And you can go ahead and mark those places. I like to use sticky notes to mark places in the book where I'm going to stop when I'm doing a read aloud, and that gives me a little sign that I need to stop at that point. I also recommend practicing reading the text out loud before you do it with your class. And you can use gestures and expression, and that kind of gives you a chance to practice if there's any dialogue or exchange of dialogue between characters, then you have the chance to practice that. And even maybe practice using different voices, which the students love. So one of the most important things about planning is the text selection. So I wanted to focus on that a little bit. This is your chance to really engage students in the lesson. There are many digital and print resources available to help teachers locate texts. Teachers can also consult with their librarian to find a book to match their needs. But make sure you give the librarian ample notice before a text is needed. Don't just run in the morning of and ask. Most of the time they'll be able to help you, but if you want to get a really quality text to match your learning objective, give them some time to pull some things for you. There are different types of fiction you can use in a read aloud. It's not always a picture book, but you could use novels, short stories, picture books, poetry, and student writing. With my fifth graders, I do use picture books quite often because they're short. You can target a skill and not take up too much time, and really target multiple skills at once. I also read aloud novels sometimes, pieces of novels, poetry. So those things are all good for fiction read alouds with your students. I also put this resource at the bottom, the Genre Study by Fountas and Pinnell. This is a great resource for finding books to go with different skills. At the back of this book, they have a big appendix that has, by grade level, different titles that match with different genres, and so that's helpful when you're planning. Another thing you want to consider is materials you're going to need during the read aloud. You may want to create anchor charts, such as the ones below for student reference during the read aloud. You should also plan any follow-up activities beforehand. On the left, there's a reading skill chart for reference. So this is the kind of chart that would just be hanging up in the room during the read aloud that students could use to refer to as they're trying to use their reading skills. The one on the right is a chart that you might create to fill out during the read aloud to model a reading strategy. So you may have one or the other or both of these kinds of anchor charts that you would need to make before your read aloud. That's one thing that you need to plan beforehand. You may want to consider is providing students with some sentence stems to help them create effective questions during conversations. You should be giving students opportunities to talk during your read aloud, and so to help some of those struggling readers, I like to provide them with some sentence starters, and I usually write those on sentence strips that I will put up near where I'm going to be reading out loud. So the types of sentence stems you're going to use really depend on the text that you're reading and the skill you're targeting, but these are some examples below. This part is really saying, this is not making sense because, at first I thought, but now I think, this is like, I'm guessing that blank will happen next. Since this happened, I bet the next thing that will happen is, this character is like blank because, I don't like this part because, I imagine or I see. This is what you could have them say when they're trying to visualize what's happening in the story. And the last one, I can tell the character is blank because blank. And I like to use that with characterization. And these sentence stems are also very helpful for your English language learners who may not understand how to have these conversations or have the vocabulary to do that. So when you're beginning your read aloud, there are several different ways you can start. First, you could activate students' prior knowledge. You could do a picture walk through the text, and that's typically going to be mostly for when you're reading informational text, but occasionally in fiction text and depending on grade level as well. You can use an anticipation guide. You could make a connection with the setting, the characters, the author, or title. You could invite students to make predictions about the story, maybe show them the title or show them the picture. You could even have them make a prediction about what they think the title is if you cover up the title and show them the picture on the front cover, maybe the back cover. And you could also remind students of traits of good readers. That could be a way that you start your read aloud is by saying, remember, good readers think out loud. Remember, good readers have a picture in their head, that sort of thing. So once you start, during a read aloud, you really need to make sure you're making your read aloud interactive. This prevents students from being disengaged and kind of bored during a read aloud. So there's some things to do to help make sure your read aloud is interactive, and the first is to pause and ask questions during the read aloud. And remember, you should be planning ahead and determining your questions beforehand. You should have students, or you could have students write their thoughts in a journal during the read aloud. I do that occasionally, and that gets them engaged in what's happening. They have to express their thoughts as we read through the story. Ask students to share and discuss with peers. This should be happening pretty much in every read aloud that you do. Ask students to make predictions. You could pause and ask them to guess what's going to happen next and ask them for evidence. Ask students to describe the mental picture you have during the story. You could invite students to ask questions about what's going on in the story. Model thinking out loud for them. This is critical as you're reading the story to model what you're thinking. One great strategy for readers is to be thinking during stories, and so for our struggling readers, this is really important to show them how to do this. So some examples, you could say, I wonder, this reminds me of when, or maybe this is happening because. So that's really key to do. Also, making comments about the story, and finally, looking for teachable moments that occur without prompting. Maybe a student makes a connection to the text, or there's a connection to a current event that's happening. So don't be afraid to pull in those teachable moments that happen as you're going. Regarding the value of interactive read-alouds, Kathy Miller states, such actions as asking and answering questions and making predictions mimic the mental processes mature readers constantly go through to understand what they read. Those types of read-alouds result in gains in vocabulary, comprehension strategies, story schema, and concept development. So those are some of the benefits of making your read-aloud interactive. Once you finish your read-aloud, there are several ways you can close the lesson. You could have students respond, and you could revisit the text, go back and talk about things that happened. You could have students retell the story, or you could retell the story, summarize the story. You could have students check predictions they made if they wrote it in their journal, or just discuss it with a peer and see if they were right or wrong. You could take some student questions about the story. You could use graphic organizers. Students could fill out a chart or some other graphic organizer, or you could have students fill out a story map or plot diagram about the story. And those are some of the ways you could close a read aloud. There are others as well. I wanted to kind of end with some read aloud don'ts. These are things I recommend you do not do during a read aloud. The first is do not select a book on the same day of the read aloud. Give yourself time to find quality text. And I speak on this one from experience. We all get stressed out and in a rush sometimes. And I notice that the days that I do this and don't take time to plan ahead and just go in and grab a book and try to read with my students, the lessons are not effective. So try as much as you can to take time to select books. The second one is do not try to do a cold read. Always read the text before the lesson so that you're prepared to ask questions and make connections. Again, this is something in my earlier years I did, so I speak from experience here as well. You're going to get more out of the lesson if you prepare and read it in advance. Do not assume because a student is not speaking that they are not engaged, or if they're not watching you the whole time. Listen to their conversations with peers to gauge the level of engagement. So if they're not looking at you, if they're looking around, if they don't look visually engaged, they may still be listening, and you can listen into their conversations to decide whether or not they're comprehending and understanding the story. Do not expect one great read aloud to improve student skills. Read aloud should be done consistently over time to see gains. So you can't just do one great read aloud on inferring and expect students to be able to infer. You have to do this consistently and model for your students. Finally, do not be afraid to read aloud occasionally for student enjoyment. Students need to also see a model of reading for pleasure without an activity or learning objective attached. This is one way to increase excitement and reading motivation. It's really important that sometimes we put away the worksheets and the graphic organizers and the learning activities and just read to our kids. They need to see that reading is a pleasurable activity, and this is something that gets them excited about reading too. So don't be scared to every once in a while just read to your students for their enjoyment. I have some further reading for you as well. So these are some texts you can check into and a couple articles to get more information about read alouds. And finally, my references. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. It's a good reference for you, and I wish you all the best with your read alouds with your students. Thank you very much.